The rain fell in soft whispers that night, coating the streets in a silver sheen, washing away the noise of the world. A man stood beneath a flickering lamppost, his reflection trembling in the puddle at his feet. His name was Adrian Cole, a face once known in the halls of corporate power, now hidden behind exhaustion and regret. The briefcase in his hand was empty, not just of documents, but of meaning. Everything he'd built gone. Yet, in the hollow ache of failure, something still burned quietly within him. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something rawer, deeper, the stubborn ember of refusal. Refusal to stay where he'd fallen. Hours earlier, he had walked out of the towering glass building that had been his kingdom for 15 years. The security guard didn't even look up as he passed. Success had a strange way of blinding people. When it left you, so did their eyes. His company had been acquired, his position dissolved, and his reputation, a casualty of boardroom politics. But none of that hurt as much as the silence from those who once called him leader. He walked aimlessly through the storm, his expensive shoes ruined by the water, his tie clinging to his neck like a noose. The city lights blurred through the rain, distorted, dreamlike. He felt like a ghost wandering through a world that no longer recognized him. Every step echoed with memories of laughter in conference rooms, the applause of success, the smug certainty that it would last forever. He passed a cafe, warm light spilling through its window. Inside, people talked, laughed, lived, completely unaware that the world had just ended for one man outside. Adrian stopped, watching through the glass. He could almost taste the comfort in there. But he didn't enter. Not yet. Instead, he took shelter beneath the awning of a bookstore. Its sign was faded, its shelves visible through the glass, lined with forgotten wisdom. A small, open sign hung crookedly on the door. He hesitated, then pushed it open. A bell chimed, delicate and nostalgic. The air inside was dry and scented with paper and time. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through him. He looked up from his newspaper. "Rough night?" the old man asked, voice calm and almost knowing. Adrian gave a half-laugh. "You could say that. Storms have a way of finding those who need them," the man said, folding his paper neatly. "What are you looking for?" Adrian hesitated. The truth was he didn't know. Maybe a reason to keep walking. Maybe a version of himself that hadn't given up. "Something to help me start again," he said quietly. The man nodded, stood, and disappeared between the aisles. When he returned, he carried a single worn-out book. Its cover was cracked, its title barely readable. The Art of Becoming. "Take it," the old man said. "No charge. But read it slowly." Adrian opened the first page. Inside, in careful handwriting, was a single quote: "Act as if you are already the person you wish to become." He frowned. "Sounds like a fortune cookie." The man smiled. "Or a key, depending on how you use it." That night, Adrian took the book home. His apartment was too clean, too quiet, like a museum of his former self. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the rain. The words from the book echoed in his head. "Act as if you are already the person you wish to become." What did that even mean? Pretend? Fake it? He'd spent years being someone others expected him to be. That hadn't worked out. But something about that line tugged at him. Maybe it wasn't about pretending to be successful. Maybe it was about thinking like someone who hadn't lost everything. He closed his eyes and imagined what that version of himself would do tomorrow, if he wasn't broken, if he still believed. He'd wake early, dress like he had purpose, walk like he owned the day. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. So that's what he did. The next morning, Adrian put on his best suit, not for meeting, but for himself. He shaved carefully, polished his shoes, tied his tie with precision. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who refused to vanish. He walked to the same cafe he'd passed the night before. The air smelled of roasted coffee and ambition. People talked business, typed furiously on laptops. Adrian took a seat near the window and ordered nothing but black coffee. At the next table, Two young men discussed a startup idea. Their excitement was contagious, but their plan flawed. Adrian couldn't help it. He leaned over. "Sorry," he said, "I couldn't help overhearing. You'll never get investors with projections like that." They turned, startled. "And you are?" one asked. "Someone who's made that mistake before," Adrian replied calmly. They looked skeptical, but curious. One of them, the more observant one, asked, "Then how would you do it?" For the first time in months, Adrian felt his mind ignite again. Numbers, strategies, visions, all came rushing back. He sketched out a few ideas on their napkin, guiding them like he once guided entire departments. When they left, they thanked him. And when they were gone, Adrian sat back, smiling faintly. For 2 hours, he had forgotten to feel like a failure. He had acted as if he were still the man he wanted to be, and it had felt real. He opened the book again. The next line read, "To become, you must first behave as if you already are." That night, something shifted. He began writing, plans, visions, reflections. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, he was moving again. The storm outside had passed, but inside him, a new one had begun, a storm of rebirth. Before going to bed, he thought of the old man in the bookstore. He wanted to thank him. But when he returned the next day, the shop was gone. No sign, no lights, nothing but an empty space, as if it had never existed. Adrian stood in front of the darkened window, the worn book in his hand, and smiled. Some doors, he realized, only open for those who have fallen far enough to need them. He didn't notice the figure watching him from across the street, a woman in a gray coat, holding a small notebook. She had been waiting for him to find that book. And now that he had, her work was only beginning. Sparkles, don't forget to like this video and subscribe my channel for more inspiring stories like this, Sparkles. She watched him from across the rain-damp street, her gray coat blending into the fog that hovered above the city. To anyone else, she was just another passerby waiting for a cab. But her eyes never left Adrian. Every movement he made, every flicker of confusion or quiet determination on his face, she noted it all, writing briefly in her small leather-bound notebook. When he turned to leave, clutching the art of becoming tightly in his hand, she closed the notebook, slipped it into her coat pocket, and followed at a careful distance. Adrian walked as if he were being carried by something unseen, a force that wasn't quite confidence, but wasn't despair anymore either. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of renewal. He didn't know where he was going, only that standing still no longer felt like an option. The ghost of failure still haunted him, but it no longer dictated his pace. He reached the park, where puddles shimmered like mirrors of another world. Children were playing near the swings, their laughter echoing in the cool air. He sat on a bench, the same one he used to pass every morning on his way to the office. Back then, he had never noticed the faces of people sitting there. He had been too busy rushing toward meetings that no longer existed. Now he found himself watching them, each stranger carrying their own invisible stories, some heavy, some light. He opened the book again. The next passage read, "Greatness begins in the quiet moments when you decide to no longer live small." He ran his fingers over the words. It felt less like advice and more like a challenge. He remembered how, at his lowest point, he had lived small, not physically but mentally. He'd let his defeat define his boundaries. Every day since losing his job, he had shrunk a little more. But now, reading that line, something inside him stirred. He took out his phone, scrolled through old contacts, and found a name, Marcus Layton, his former colleague, once his closest friend before ambition drove a wedge between them. He hesitated. Marcus was now the CEO of the company that had replaced Adrian's position. Reaching out could feel humiliating. Yet the thought came again. Act as if you are already the person you wish to become. So he dialed. Adrian. Marcus's voice carried surprise, maybe even discomfort. Didn't expect to hear from you. I wouldn't expect it either, Adrian said calmly. But I thought it was time we talked. A pause. Then, about what? About a new beginning, Adrian said. For both of us. The silence stretched so long that Adrian almost ended the call. Then Marcus sighed. You still sound like a man pitching an idea. You haven't changed. Maybe I just stopped pretending to be broken, Adrian replied. There was a brief chuckle on the other end. All right, Adrian. Come by tomorrow morning. Let's see what this is about. When the call ended, Adrian exhaled deeply. For the first time in months, he felt that familiar spark of purpose, fragile but real. Across the park, the woman in gray watched him close his phone. She smiled faintly, then walked away, blending into the flow of pedestrians. That night, Adrian could barely sleep. His mind raced through possibilities, what he would say, what he could offer. But somewhere beneath the nervous energy was something steadier. He wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He wasn't trying to return to who he had been. He was becoming someone else entirely. At dawn, he dressed again in that same suit, crisp and confident. He walked to Marcus's office, an imposing building of glass and steel. As he entered the lobby, the receptionist looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. Mr. Cole? You haven't been here in a long time. Adrian smiled gently. Feels like a lifetime. The elevator doors closed around him, reflecting his image in every direction, 10 different versions of himself staring back. For a moment, he saw not the fallen executive, but the man in progress. The doors opened with a chime. Marcus's office was larger than Adrian remembered. The skyline stretched beyond the windows, glittering with morning light. Marcus stood behind the desk, arms crossed, studying him with an unreadable expression. You look better than I expected, Marcus said. I stopped looking at the ground, Adrian replied simply. Marcus gestured to the chair. All right then. What's this about? Adrian sat, the book still tucked inside his briefcase. It's about perspective. You and I built things once, teams, ideas, movements. But we built them on the wrong foundation. We chased success like it was oxygen. I want to build something different now. Something that lasts because it means something. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That sounds philosophical, not practical. It can be both, Adrian said. You know the problem with your company? Everyone's terrified of failing. No one takes bold steps anymore. Fear has replaced innovation. I want to create a platform that teaches people how to rebuild, not just careers, but mindsets. A mentorship program for those who lost their direction after losing their titles. Marcus leaned back. And you think people will pay for that? Adrian smiled. They'll live for it. Because failure isn't the end. It's the fire where new strength is forged. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked toward the window. You always had a way of making madness sound inspiring. It's not madness, Adrian said softly. It's transformation. Marcus turned back, his expression more thoughtful now. I'll think about it. Do more than think, Adrian said, standing. Start acting like the man who isn't afraid to lead something meaningful again. When he left the office, he felt lighter, not because he had secured anything, but because he had faced what once terrified him. The city outside gleamed in full sunlight. He walked with a new rhythm, his steps aligned with something larger than ambition, something closer to purpose. That evening, he sat by the window again, writing in a small journal of his own. The book from the old man lay open beside him. His notes filled page after page, ideas for workshops, community projects, mentorship programs. It was no longer just about rebuilding himself. It was about helping others find their fire again. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, a shadow moved outside his window. Adrian looked up, but saw no one. Just the reflection of city lights. Still, he felt watched. Not in a threatening way, more like being observed, studied, as if his transformation was being measured. The next morning, he found a note slipped under his door. The handwriting was elegant, familiar somehow. It read, You are on the right path. But remember, the world will test your belief before it rewards it. There was no signature, only a faint symbol at the bottom, a small, hand-drawn key. Adrian turned it over in his fingers, the words from the old book echoing again. Or a key, depending on how you use it. Somewhere in the distance, the woman in gray smiled to herself and closed her notebook. The next phase was about to begin. Adrian turned the small key symbol over and over in his hand, feeling the faint grooves under his thumb. It wasn't just a drawing. It was pressed into the paper, as though whoever had written it wanted him to feel it, not just see it. He held the note up to the light, searching for clues. There was no watermark, no hidden writing, just that single line and the symbol. Yet something about it stirred the same uneasy curiosity he'd felt the night he found the bookstore. He placed the note beside The Art of Becoming and took a slow breath. The city outside was alive. Horns, footsteps, chatter. But within that noise, he heard something quieter, almost rhythmic, as if the world itself was waiting to see his next move. He sat back, staring out the window, and wondered who had written the note. The old man? The woman he thought he saw by the window? Or someone else entirely? He opened the book again, searching for meaning. On the next page, a new passage seemed to leap out at him. The signs will come when you begin to act, not before. Trust them, but do not depend on them. He frowned. The timing was too precise, almost uncanny. The note appeared just as he began taking steps toward change. He thought about Marcus, about their conversation. There had been a spark there, something real. But Marcus had been hesitant, and Adrian knew hesitation could bury even the best ideas. He reached for his phone again. There was a message waiting from an unknown number. Meet me tomorrow. 9 a.m. The place where you found the book. Adrian stared at the screen, heart pounding. No name. No further details. But somehow, he already knew it wasn't a coincidence. Sleep didn't come easily that night. His mind wrestled with questions, but underneath the uncertainty, he felt anticipation. Something was unfolding, something that stretched beyond reason. And though part of him feared it, another part was drawn to it with relentless curiosity. The next morning, he arrived at the spot where the bookstore had been. Only now, it wasn't empty. In its place stood a small cafe with no signboard, no name. The smell of freshly ground coffee drifted from within, inviting yet strangely familiar. He stepped inside. The same bell chimed above the door, soft, melodic, identical to the one he remembered. His pulse quickened. Behind the counter stood a woman with chestnut hair pulled neatly into a bun. Her gray coat hung on a hook nearby. She looked up and smiled as though she'd been expecting him. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." He froze. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," she said, motioning toward a corner table. "But I've known of you for some time." He sat slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You left the note." She nodded. "And the key." "Who are you?" "Someone who believes you're meant for more than rebuilding yourself," she said. "You've been chosen for something greater, a circle of people who understand the power of belief. Those who act before the world gives permission." He studied her, trying to gauge whether she was sincere or just another illusion. "A circle? Sounds like a cult." She smiled slightly. "No. Think of it as a network of awakened minds. People who found the book. People who act before they're ready." His eyes flicked toward his bag, where the book rested. "You mean others have it too?" "Every copy finds its person," she said softly. "But very few follow its path." Adrian leaned back. "And what path is that exactly?" "The one that forces you to confront the version of yourself you've been avoiding," she replied. "You've taken your first steps. You've begun to live as if. But now comes the harder part, living through the tests that will try to strip it from you." Her words hit something deep inside him. He wanted to dismiss her, but her calm certainty disarmed him. "And what do you want from me?" "Nothing," she said. "Except that you keep moving. There's a meeting tomorrow evening at Pier 9. You'll find others there, people like you. And if I don't go..." She smiled faintly. "Then you'll keep wondering who you were meant to become." Before he could respond, she stood and disappeared through a door behind the counter. When he went to follow, it was locked. He turned back to the cafe. Empty. Not a single customer. The only sound was the rain starting again outside. He walked out slowly, the bell above the door chiming once more. When he looked back through the window, the cafe was dark. The chairs were stacked, the counter empty. The next day, his thoughts were consumed by what she'd said. He told himself it was nonsense, that he was being lured into something strange. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The note, the book, the timing, everything connected too precisely to be coincidence. At exactly 7:30 that evening, he left his apartment and drove toward the docks. The sky was bruised with twilight, and the air smelled of salt and secrets. Pier 9 was nearly deserted. A few boats rocked gently in the water, their ropes creaking against the wood. He checked his watch. 8:59. Then he saw them. A small group of people gathered at the far end of the pier. Men and women of all ages, dressed simply, standing in a loose circle. As Adrian approached, the woman in gray turned and smiled. Right on time. He joined them, feeling both nervous and strangely at peace.
No one spoke for a while.
The only sound was the ocean lapping softly below. Then the woman stepped forward. "Each of us was lost once," she began. "Until we found the book. Until we understood that success isn't achieved, it's remembered. We don't become. We return." Her words sent a shiver through him. She continued, her voice calm but commanding. "You've already felt the first change, Adrian. You've begun acting as if you're the man you wish to be. But tonight, you must decide if you'll continue when the world starts to resist you."
Because it will.
It always does. Another member of the group, a tall man with gray eyes, stepped forward and handed Adrian a small black envelope. Inside was another note. "Faith is action disguised as courage. Tomorrow, someone will challenge what you believe. Remember who you've chosen to become." He looked up sharply. "What is this supposed to mean?" The woman's expression softened. "It means your test begins at dawn." Before he could ask more, the lights along the pier flickered, then went out completely. In the darkness, the sound of footsteps echoed, fading, dispersing. When the lights came back on, the group was gone. Only Adrian remained, holding the black envelope. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the water. The reflection of the city danced on the surface, shifting with the current. Something deep within him whispered that his life was no longer his own. Whatever he had stepped into, it was far larger than he could yet understand. When he returned home, the book lay open on his desk. The next line had appeared as if written by invisible hands. "Belief is only real when it is tested by doubt." He sank into his chair, the city lights flickering outside. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this much. He would no longer wait for permission to rise. The morning came not with sunlight, but with an eerie golden haze that seemed to stretch across the city, like a veil. Adrian stood before the window, watching the world below awaken to its rhythm. His reflection stared back at him. Not the man he had once been, not the broken shadow he had become, but something entirely new. The words from the book lingered in his mind, pulsing with the beat of his heart. Belief is only real when it is tested by doubt. He knew the test had arrived. At 9 sharp, his phone rang. It was Marcus. "Adrian," he said, his tone curt, "I had a board meeting this morning. They're not convinced about your idea. In fact, they're calling it unrealistic. They think you've lost touch." Adrian closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. "And you?" Marcus hesitated. "I think they might be right." For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. The old version of himself, the one who sought approval, validation, applause, wanted to fight, to explain, to convince. But the man who stood here now understood something deeper. "Then that's your truth, Marcus," he said quietly. "But mine doesn't end here." When the call ended, he didn't feel defeated. He felt free. He realized his journey was never about regaining the world's recognition. It was about remembering his own. That evening, as twilight bled across the skyline, he drove back to the pier. The water shimmered beneath a sky streaked with fire and ash. The air held the same strange stillness he'd felt the night he first found the book. The woman in gray was waiting for him. Her presence was calm, yet commanding, her gaze steady as the tide. "You came," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "The test came just like you said. I lost the chance to rebuild what I thought I wanted. But somehow, I don't feel like I lost anything at all." She smiled faintly. Because now you understand. The book doesn't teach success. It reveals alignment. When you act as if, you align with your highest self. And once you align, nothing external can shake you. Not failure. Not rejection. Not loss. Adrian looked out over the horizon. The wind caught his hair, carrying the scent of salt and rain. Then what happens now? Now, she said, you step into what you were always meant to create. The circle's purpose isn't to guide you, it's to awaken those who can guide others. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, silver key, identical to the symbol drawn on the note. Every person who carries the book will need someone to help them remember. That's your role now. Adrian took the key, feeling its cool weight in his palm. And the old man? The bookstore? Her eyes softened, filled with something like sorrow and pride. He was once where you are now. Each of us carries the light for a time, then passes it on. The bookstore appears only for those who need awakening. You found it because you were ready to rise. He turned the key over, realization dawning. So, this isn't the end. It's the beginning, she whispered. Every ending is only an illusion crafted by fear. The wind grew stronger, waves crashing against the pier. When he looked back, she was gone. Only her coat remained, draped neatly over the railing, fluttering in the breeze. Adrian stood there, the key glinting in his hand. The sun dipped below the waterline, spilling its last golden light across the world, and for the first time in years, he felt utterly, completely alive. The next weeks unfolded like a dream. He launched his vision, Project Ascent, a mentorship platform for those rebuilding their lives after loss, failure, or self-doubt. It wasn't about business strategies or financial gain. It was about rediscovering the art of belief, of acting, as if until the inner world reshaped the outer. The movement spread faster than he could have imagined. Stories poured in from around the world, people finding courage to leave toxic jobs, to start anew, to create with purpose instead of fear. They shared one phrase again and again. Act as if. Adrian spoke on stages, not as the polished executive he once was, but as the man who had been broken and reborn. Each word he spoke carried the quiet power of lived truth. We wait for the world to give us permission, he would tell his audiences. But the world waits for us to decide who we already are. The moment you act like the person you wish to become, the universe reorganizes itself around your belief. Years passed, but the fire never dimmed. The book remained on his desk, its pages now worn and marked with his own notes. One evening, while preparing a speech, he noticed something new at the back of the book, a blank page that hadn't been there before. He touched it lightly, and faint words began to appear, as if written by an invisible hand. When you finish your becoming, another will begin theirs. Leave the key where it can be found. Adrian smiled. He knew what he had to do. That night, under the same flickering lamppost where his story had once begun, he placed the silver key inside a plain envelope. He tucked it into the handle of a small bookstore door that had reopened after years of silence. Through the window, he saw shelves filled with familiar books, the scent of paper and wisdom thick in the air. A new man stood behind the counter, young, uncertain, lost in his thoughts. Adrian smiled quietly and turned away before the bell above the door could chime. As he walked down the street, the rain began again. Not the cold, punishing rain of his downfall, but a soft, cleansing drizzle that shimmered beneath the city lights. Each drop carried the promise of renewal. In the reflection of the puddles, his figure no longer trembled. It stood firm, tall, radiant. He didn't need to look back to know the cycle had begun again. Somewhere, another lost soul would soon open the art of becoming, and the story would start anew. Not with despair, but with a whisper of possibility. And as Adrian disappeared into the mist of the awakening city, one truth lingered, powerful and eternal. Success is never something we chase. It is something we remember. Sparkles, don't forget to like this video and subscribe my channel for more powerful, life-changing stories like this. Sparkles.